Welcome to Ghost Stories with Kitten. Alright, it's late at night here. It's particularly spooky today, so I think this is a good day to read you all some ghost stories. Just a reminder, these are real, true paranormal tales read to you by a real human and not AI. Let's go. I work at a haunted nursing home. I just recently got a job doing a night shift at a retirement centre close to my house. One of the first things someone told me was that the new hall was haunted. For clarification, about 2 years ago there was this guy living at the nursing home that liked to help around the place a lot. And one day, he asked a worker if he could borrow the water hose that day as they were spraying off the patios, and the worker agreed, since the guy usually sprayed off the patio near his room. Oh boy, I can tell where this story's going. Well, an hour went by, and the workers had gone about their duties, not even thinking about the request, until, an hour later, the boss noted the man had not returned the hose yet, and so he went to find him. They found him hanging from a tree in the backyard. Since his death, they swear up and down that he haunts the hall. Every worker and resident swears that they have seen him, even the ones who don't believe in the paranormal. But a few days ago, on my first night working there, I was cleaning the windows around midnight on the hall, the same hall the man used to live on. When I looked up and I saw the reflection of a man standing behind me, watching me, I turned around. No one was there. Everyone else was asleep, the residents, or they were not near the hall, co-workers. Fast forward to a few hours ago, me and a co-worker were taking a break, around 3 a.m. at this time. The both of us talking in a parking lot when she looked away from a road for half a second. She turned back to the road and completely froze and gestured for me to come and look. Standing in the middle of the road was a tall black figure, taller than even me, and I'm 6'2". I'd wager it was about a head taller than me. Oh, it was just standing in the middle of the road. We couldn't tell if it was staring at us or staring down the road. We both stared at the figure, at least for a good minute or two. When it started walking down the road, I followed it, thinking it might be one of the residents trying to leave in the middle of the night. But when I got to the road, it was gone. It wasn't walking down the road. It wasn't walking down the other road connected to it, and it didn't go into a house, as I would have heard the door open and shut. It wasn't fast or close enough to reach the end of the road in 3 seconds that it took me to go through the parking lot to the road. What freaked us both out was talking about it, we realized 2 things. A, it didn't stand like you would expect a human to stand. It was all stiff and everything, and it just seemed to be wrong in a way I couldn't figure out. B, we both realized later we didn't see any arms on it. Wow. We didn't see any arms when it was standing still, and we didn't see any arms when it walked off. You know, narrator here, I've heard a lot of ghost stories about like torsos, without legs, or you hear the classic like headless horseman, right, that goes without a head. I don't think I've ever heard of an apparition without arms, and that sounds terrifying. Anyway, years ago, I was in England at an ex-boyfriend's home in a large Victorian mansion. This was in Brandon, Suffolk. Gorgeous English countryside. It was his parents' home, and been in his family for about 3 generations, if I remember correctly. He was called into work, and I was left in the home with his mother. She came upstairs to let me know that she was going to be running errands, and she would be gone for the day, so I was home alone. About an hour passed, and I got up to use the bathroom, which was inside the bedroom. Instinctively, I went in and locked the door out of habit, even though I was home alone. The door to the bedroom was closed, and the door to the bathroom was also closed and locked. I heard knocking. on the bedroom door, and I kept answering for somebody to come in, and no one answered. I heard knocking again, called out again for them to come in, and still no answer. I assumed it was his mum who forgot something and had returned to the house. A couple of minutes later, I heard a woman's voice from the other side of a wall in the bathroom calling my name. I kept answering, really thinking it must be his mother. I heard this woman calling me 3 or 4 more times, which I again answered, but I never got a response. About 45 minutes later, my ex came home and told him how his mum, and I told him how his mum was knocking on the door, and she must not have heard me. But she was calling me, and I was answering her, but she did not hear me. I felt really bad, because when I left the bathroom, she left the house again. He was super confused, because he told me his mum had been out all day, and that she wasn't back home. So I told him that she must have left. She told me she was leaving, but then less than an hour later, I assumed she must have forgotten something, because she definitely came back and was knocking on the door and calling for me, because I could hear her from the bathroom. Sounds like a mimic to me, narrator note. His mum got back home about 3 or 4 hours later, around dinner time. And when we sat around the dinner table, I apologized for not getting to her before she left the house again, and she looked to me like I was absolutely insane. She had no idea what I was talking about. So I explained the story. She very flippantly said, "Oh, that must have been the ghost of that girl." And everyone laughed. I laughed too. But this house was super creepy, and I kind of believed it because I definitely believe in paranormal stuff. My ex got really serious and looked at me and said, "I'll talk to you about it later." After dinner, we went back upstairs, and he said for me to show him where I could hear the woman calling for me, and I said, "Oh, just from the other side of the wall in the bathroom." And he said, "The wall in the bathroom?" I said, "Yeah, the wall in the bathroom." He said, "Which wall?" So I went into the bathroom and pointed to the wall, and he said, "You realize that wall is to the outside, right?" Oh, so creepy. We were about 4 stories up. This house was a massive, literal mansion. And he said that I became white as a ghost because I didn't even realize that was the case. We were extremely high up, and on the other side of that wall was a courtyard with an in-ground pool far below us. He proceeded to tell me a story about a young woman back in the 1800s or so that had lived in a house with her family and entered a relationship with an older man that the family did not approve of, and they forbade her to see him. She rebelled and continued to see him anyway. When the family found out that she was secretly seeing him, they locked her in her room, which happened to be my ex's bedroom. I'm not quite sure how long she was locked in that room for, but there used to be train tracks that ran behind the house you could still see in that courtyard. Apparently she threw herself onto the train tracks out of a window, and people have heard her calling their names for years since she died. The whole family assumed that she was the one calling me because I was always at the house. Needless to say, I never wanted to sleep there, ever again. That was a great story. It actually reminds me of a ghost story that my father had, that he told me when I was growing up, and it was one of his. He has had a couple of paranormal experiences, but only a handful, maybe 3 or 4, but this was one of the experiences he had had, and I did genuinely believe him. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's very similar to this story. He always tells me it's the story of when he encountered a poltergeist. He was living in England. He grew up in England like I did, and he was at his family's house, but his mother, father, and his brother, they were all out of the house, so much like the person in the previous story, he was very alone, and much like the person in the previous story, he also was in the bathroom. While he was in the bathroom, he heard a single knock on the wall next to him, and so something sort of came over him, and just for fun, he knocked back. He said something compelled him just as a joke to kind of knock on the wall and go. And then, and he swears to God this is true, it was followed by 2 knocks. So he went, and then it was followed by 3 knocks. So then he waited, and he did 4 knocks, and sure enough, after he had done it, 1, 2, 3, 4, he realized that it must have been a ghost. There was no one else in the house. He was completely alone. He got up, he ran out of the bathroom, he ran out of the house, and much like the girl in this story, where he heard those knocks from was on the 3rd story of the house, so it was 3 stories up, and the wall only backed up to complete air. There was nothing outside the window, just the air, and that is where he had heard the knocks coming from. And that story always scared me as a child to hear. The girl with the umbrella. So, for as long as I can remember, I've been into the dark and macabre. I love listening to scary stories and telling them, and I don't know why, but when my oldest niece, Janie, was born, she seemed to have the same fascination that I did. When she was about 5, she had an imaginary friend that had a certain eeriness to it. She called her the girl with the umbrella, and sometimes she would say that she was watching us, and weirdly she would be told things by this mysterious entity that turned out to be true. But when she was about 7, the girl with the umbrella disappeared. She had done doodles of her after her disappearance, but always would leave her face blank, not because the girl didn't have a face, but because the face would make my sister, her mother, very sad. As time went on, my niece and I had a bit of a connection where we'd talk about ghosts and paranormal happenings. We'd find it funny how her father, this big tough man, would twist and squirm at the mention of ghosts. Then, last year, when she turned 12, she wanted to do a podcast where we'd hang out and tell ghost stories and connect to others. Great idea, by the way. Well, obviously, her parents had said no about their 12-year-old being exposed to the internet. Oh, well, to be fair, that's absolutely fair. But I decided we'd record the podcast, but I would never post it. Hey, yeah, but at least you can have it for the memories. So we got into the habit of her coming over, having dinner with me and my boyfriend, and then the 3 of us recording and just having a fun time. But then in March, Janie and her father got into a car accident and neither of them made it out. Well, it's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. My sister was devastated, obviously, and my boyfriend and I moved her daughters Mia and Harper into our house while my sister Lee went to see her in-laws. It was hard on all of us, but losing Janie was devastating to me. I tried to keep a straight face in front of the girls, but there wasn't a night when my boyfriend didn't hold me as I sobbed at losing her. Sorry, story's making me well up here, I apologize. I don't really know when it happened, but a few months back the girls had talked about seeing their sister and that she always was following either their mother or me around. It was a nice thought, but I didn't expect her to really be around. We had a code, and unless it appeared, I knew she wasn't there. It was stupid, I know, but it was this old record player that my grandpa had, and Janie and I had set up a code that when I died I would play the record for her so that she knew I was around. I kept a record player in my bedroom and it never turned on. The girls insisted that Janie was walking around the house. A few days back, my boyfriend had finished a drawing he was working on. It was a picture of me standing at the bus stop, but above me was the girl with the umbrella, but this time she had a face. And it was Janie. He had told me that Janie told him years ago the girl had her face. He told me he didn't want to freak me out, and that he had pinky swore with her he would never tell, but it turns out he listened to Mia and Harper, and that they described Janie as holding an umbrella. He said it freaked him out a bit, And so he started to do the drawing, and when he showed it to them, they said that's exactly how she looked. I started to freak out, like, oh, that's obviously crazy, but I'm not sure what to do here. I can't tell Lee. She'd lose her mind if she realized the implications here. I've been a believer for years, but this has really spooked me. I saw something impossible to explain, and I believe that my mother's prayer for protection brought me an angel. This story happened a few years ago, but I still remember every detail to this day. It's difficult to put into words, but what I experienced was real. I live with my mother in a house that is below my grandmother's house. That day, I was going to the mall and called an Uber. I went upstairs and waited in a hallway that leads to the street. Leaning against the wall, looking at my cell phone, my mother has always been a woman of faith, never fanatical, but firm with God, always praying. She has a habit of praying for the house, praying for her children, for her grandchildren. As I waited, I heard his voice in prayer. The door was open, so I approached the stairs to hear better. I always liked listening to her pray. At first she asked for protection. So far, everything is normal. But he soon began to pray of authority, asking for all evil to leave our house. It was at that moment my dog ran up the stairs and came straight to me. She started pushing me with her body, agitated, as if she wanted me to get out of there. She wasn't scared, she was brave. What I saw in her was urgency, as if she were trying to protect me, to warn me about something I didn't yet understand. I turned on the flashlight on my cell phone, trying to understand what was happening. And then I saw it. When I turned off the light, something came out of my house. It was like a dark, thick shadow that wasn't smoke, and it didn't feel solid or real either. It was dense, heavy, a dark presence, as if it belonged to another plane of existence, but was somehow crossing into ours. It grew and moved quickly, climbing the outside wall and jumping onto the wall of my grandmother's house. And there, before my eyes, it took shape. What appeared was a gigantic, bestial dog. Its body was leaning over the wall, huge paws, long snout, pointy ears. The hair seemed hard, bristly, not soft, not natural. He stood there, completely still, just looking at my grandmother's house. I was frozen in fear. Leaning against the wall, I couldn't look away from it. It was then that a voice spoke, right to my right side, clear as if they were there with me. It wasn't a thought. I promise it was a real voice, strong, firm, intense. "Don't look at him," it said. "Look at your cell phone." I still couldn't move in fear, so much so it was like my body was stuck, paralyzed, until an inexplicable force took over me, as if something bigger inside me was pushing me, and I managed to lower my head away from it. Even with my face down, I tried to look out of the corner. And that's when I saw the creature turn its head towards me. The eyes were green, a bright, deep green that was impossible, just impossible to forget. And then he jumped into my grandmother's house. At the same time, the environment changed. The air became light. The tension suddenly disappeared. It was as if everything had somehow returned to normal. I believe this lasted less than a minute, but to me, it all seemed like an eternity. A few weeks later, my grandmother started complaining that her neighbor was coming into her house in the early hours of the morning. She screamed and said she saw someone in the room. But her house is completely closed with barred windows, and her room is in the back. Nobody believed it, until one day she told me that she saw green eyes under the television watching her and my grandfather sleep. Shortly thereafter, my grandfather began to develop dementia. He ended up passing away because of it, and today my grandmother lives with advanced stage Alzheimer's. I don't know what that was, but I know I saw it, I know I heard it, and I know truly that someone or something protected me from it in that moment. Sounds to me as a narrator here like maybe that was a rougarou, which here in New Orleans we have this kind of supernatural creature. It's almost like a werewolf, but it can take on a wolf, bestial-like form, but also man-like at the same time. So maybe that's what was on your grandmother's house. I think I might have accidentally been my own ghost 17 years ago. Okay, buckle up, because this is equal parts creepy and ridiculous. Back in college, my classmates and I had an overnight group session at one of our friends' houses to finish a case study for a presentation. It was past midnight, everyone else was in the dining area, and I was alone in the bedroom, typing away on my laptop. Suddenly, from my peripheral vision, I saw something. Not just a shadow, an entity. Think Sadako vibes. What is Sadako vibes? Is that the ghost from a grudge? Narrator asking here. Let me know in the comments section below if you know. Long hair covering the face. But here's the weird detail. The hair wasn't jet black like in the horror movies. It was dry, frizzy, and this brown copper-ish colour. Exactly like over-processed damaged hair you'd see after too many bleach sessions. I could still picture it clearly, split ends, fried texture that works. She was behind me, slightly leaning like she was looking over my shoulder at the screen. But I couldn't see her face, just the hair. It lasted maybe a couple of seconds. Blink and she was gone. I froze when I bolted straight to the dining area. I was shaking, and I told my classmates that I'd seen something. Instant, creepy overnight ghost story for that night, and then life moved on and I forgot about it. Until today. Fast forward 17 or 18 years later. I'm brushing my ash blonde hair and getting ready to go to my favourite salon for a treatment because my hair is dry as AF after a recent touch-up. I'm looking in the mirror, inspecting the damage, when it hits me like a horror plot twist. What the hell? Was it me? Was I the ghost I had seen? Like, it looked exactly like me. Did I time travel or something? Was that ghost actually the future me, fried hair and all, looking over my own work on the laptop? Was I just critiquing myself from the future? The hair colour matches, the frizz matches. The only thing missing is the ability to astral project again, which I could do back then, but that's another story. So yeah, either way I saw a ghost, or I'm destined to become one for a split second, 17 years in the past. I guess I'll find out once I learn to time travel, or remote view, or maybe I'll just invest in better conditioner. That was great. The Grim Reaper lurking in hospital. I can see spirits. Don't a lot of people think someone who says that sounds shady? That's why I don't usually tell people things like this. But if you're someone who likes scary things, maybe I could tell you. Saying that, I'm going to write down a story a friend of mine who works as a nurse told me over drinks when we met again for the first time in a while. She said she had been able to sense the presence of spirits since she was a child. At some point, it became normal for her. When she saw them, she started ignoring them in everyday life. If she did that, she said, they weren't much different from living people. She didn't find them all that scary. This is a story of a time when even she felt a little chill. I'll write it in her voice, so feel free to read it just to pass the time. November 2011. That day, I happened to be on a night shift at the hospital. There was a patient who had undergone hip hemiarthroplasty. God, I'm so sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce that. A surgery, along with a shoulder surgery, and I remember their kidney function worsening after the procedures. Their condition overall had become quite poor. They were on a dobutamine, Dobutamine. I'm going to guess that's not antihistamine, but come on, what's a word for it? It's going to drive me nuts if I don't remember it. Antibiotic. Sorry, God, why can I not remember that? Dobutamine, and hooked up to a monitor. And in the event of a sudden change, they would technically DNR, meaning no resuscitation efforts were to be made. While I was doing my rounds, I heard the gurgling sound of phlegm building up in the back of her throat. So I put on disposable gloves to perform suctioning, and then, suddenly, I sensed something at the foot of the bed. Out of the corner of my eye, that something came into view. A light blue hospital gown, pure white hair hanging down to the waist. I couldn't see the face, but in an instant I thought it was a woman, and I realized I had seen that figure before. It was the same one who had been watching me from a doorway when I went to take that patient's vitals. On another day during oral care, I saw her peeking in through the gap in the curtain, and this time, as you can guess, she was getting closer and closer. First the entrance, then the curtain, and now the foot of the bed. Even so, aside from a simple feeling of revulsion, she seemed no different from the spirits I usually saw, or so I thought. When my night shift ended and I headed home, I was on the late shift that next day, so around noon I went up to the ward. The room light at the top of the stairs was the one where critically ill patient was staying, or the room right at the top of the stairs was the one where a critically ill patient was staying, rather. From that room, a member of cleaning staff came out, carrying a mop and a cleaning cloth. "Hey," I greeted them casually, and they replied, "They've been taken away." "Oh, good thing you're on late shift." After a while, another patient in poor condition from heart failure was admitted. That patient was placed in a monitored room close to the nurse's station. Nighttime. That day I was on a late shift, so around 7:30 or so. As I was positioning the patient to perform oral care, she was standing in a doorway again. The next day, I was on a day shift and was assigned to that patient. When I went up to her room in the afternoon to adjust the IV drip rate, this time she was at the foot of the bed. 3 days later, that patient passed away. Things like this happened several times. At our end-of-the-year holiday party, after I'd had some drinks, I told the story to my senior co-worker. Well, my senior co-worker told me, "I think it's the Grim Reaper. I've heard the same thing happened at another hospital in the same group as ours. Apparently, there were 2 people who could see it. When those 2 would busily start preparing for post-mortem care, the patient would die a few hours later. It's the kind of story you might hear anywhere. But what chilled me the most were the next words. They said there is always a sign before the Grim Reaper takes someone away. First, it stands in a doorway, and once it comes into a room, it'll be within a week. And when that happens, the ringing in your ears always gets severe. I get it too. Whenever I run into her, there's always been a loud ringing in my ears, so loud it makes me dizzy. So, is it only in the hospitals within this group? Or is it the same in this hospital, or is it everywhere? I just don't know. But I was together with the Grim Reaper. The moment I thought that, a shiver ran down my spine and goosebumps rose. If I grew older, and when the time comes for me to leave this world, will I see it? Will the Grim Reaper be right next to me? The grinning head that boarded the train after 1 a.m. This is a story I heard just recently from a friend who lives in New York. It was so creepy when I imagined it that I'm writing it down now exactly as I heard it. That night, it was the subway in the middle of the night, just before 2 a.m. The car almost empty, and the only people on board were me and a middle-aged man sitting diagonally across from me, drinking from a brown paper bag. I thought, come on, don't drink on the train. He wasn't making any noise, and I couldn't smell it from where I was, so I figured it was fine and just kept looking at my phone. That night, I was heading home after something nice had happened in my love life, so I was actually in a pretty good mood. It had been just the two of us, the drunk middle-aged man and me the whole time. When the train stopped at a station, I noticed a man in a suit standing just outside the doors, right near where the middle-aged man was sitting. I didn't think much of it and went back to looking at my phone, until suddenly, in a mechanical voice, he said, "What are you looking at?" Startled, I looked up, and his smirking face was right in front of me, peering at my phone screen. What the hell? My heart jumped. As soon as I took a closer look at him, an even bigger shock hit me. The man in the suit didn't have a body. Or rather, it just wasn't here, not here. His body was still on the platform, while only his head had stretched into the car like a rubber band being pulled, leaving the rest somehow behind. I caught the sight of a middle-aged man frozen in place with his drink still in hand. It was obvious he could see the man in the suit too. I didn't have the courage to look back at the face, so I just stared at the middle-aged man. Then came an automated announcement. "Stand clear of the closing doors, please," followed by a short chime. The long-necked man in the suit didn't seem interested in coming all the way inside. Instead, he slowly slid his head back towards my body left on the platform, grinning in a strange and unsettling way, laughing as he did. Relieved, I thought I was safe. But just before his head had completely cleared the doorway, the doors shut. Why would the doors close now? I felt nothing but dread in that moment. Maybe he wasn't a ghost at all, but some kind of rubber man. Even with his stretched neck crushed in the doorway, the man in the suit kept smirking. The train started moving slowly. His trapped neck stretched like rubber, following along. Through the window I saw his body, still standing stiffly, fade into the distance. The laughter could still be heard from him. He was shaking his head violently from side to side and letting out that bizarre laugh. There was a loud bang as his face hit the doors, but he still kept following, just his head. I was trembling, begging in my mind for it to stop, when finally, as he'd reached the limit of his stretch, his head popped out through the gap in the doors, pop, and vanished into the night. After that, the middle-aged man, now completely sober, I might add, got off with me at the next station, both of us still shaking, and somehow we ended up going for a drink together after that. He'd had the face whipping back and forth right in front of him. He must have been way more terrified than I was. I never exchanged contact information with him, but I honestly wonder sometimes now how he is doing to this day. Your narrator here, I've got to say, I read a lot of ghost stories and glitch in the matrix stories on this channel, and I think that probably wins a prize of one of the strangest ghost encounters I've ever heard. And if that story is real, which is very extreme for me to actually believe it's real, but let's say just for a hypothetical moment here that was a real ghost story, that is bloody terrifying. The night I saw myself again. This happened years ago, back when I was still a student, and at that point in my life, my third eye was very active. I was used to seeing and sensing things, but this was different. I was on the living room floor, working on homework, with all my books and papers spread out around me. It was storming outside, heavy rain, thunder rumbling in the distance. I was so focused on my work when suddenly I felt that chill, the one, where every hair on your body stands up because someone is watching you. For some reason, my eyes went straight to the open doorway that led to the hallway and the restroom, and that is when I saw it. It was me, hiding halfway behind the door, just staring and smiling. Not a friendly smile, a creepy smile. It lasted only a split second, but my whole body froze in place before instinct took over and I bolted straight downstairs, my heart racing. Even now, writing this, I have goosebumps just remembering it. At the time, I chalked it up to one of my scariest paranormal experiences, but now after another strange realization I've had, see my previous post here, I'm starting to think, could it actually have been me? Like some bizarre time slip, doppelganger moment, or a version of me from another reality? The thought makes my skin crawl, but also I can't stop wondering. Your narrator here, I'm gonna guess that was either a doppelganger or a mimic. Either way, I don't think it's ever a good thing to see or hear yourself. Growing up in the 80s in a haunted house. I moved to the 1920s semi-detached house in a leafy suburb of Birmingham, England, in 1986 with my parents. I was 5 and my little sister was 1. Early days I don't remember much, as we were so young. I do remember having 2 imaginary friends, who I'd named Ida and Uda Mamwe. No idea where these names came from, not your usual Sarah and Tracy names really, are they? Mum said I would play with them mostly in the loft, the attic, and the laundry room, the creepiest part of the house I might add. Then, a few years later, they just disappeared. Nothing too odd about that, I suppose, as a lot of kids have imaginary friends, and I was a bit of a loner kid. Though their names do make me creeped out a little. Fast forward a few years, maybe aged 9/10, I started having strange dreams and my body woke up. I was awake, but I was paralyzed from fear. I couldn't move it. It felt like someone was holding me down, very odd. This happened for a couple of years. Then came the TV and old record player in the lounge. Oh, and the tall lamp. They would all randomly turn on and off. Not all at once, but subtly, when it was just me in the room. No one ever believed me. I was accused of having an overactive imagination. Then came the shadows and creepy feeling in one of the corners of the lounge. It later transpired that the previous owner committed suicide in the lounge, a fact I didn't know at the time, being only a child. Moving to age 11 or 12, this is when things really started to happen, especially in my bedroom. The smallest of the bedroom at the back of the house, facing a long leafy garden, a cherry tree in the middle surrounded by plants, and an air raid shelter at the bottom of the garden. My bedroom was the creepiest. Mum later admitted this after we moved out. I would frequently place items in their usual place before I went to bed, e.g. hairbrush on my dressing room table, TV remote on the bedside table, etc., and in the morning they were in different places. I heard rustling in one corner of the bedroom all the time. I'd check. Nothing was ever there. I always had an uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. As I got older, things got worse. The bedroom door would slowly close on its own in the night. I never shut it as I felt nervous. It was a door you had to pull hard on carpet to even move. Then came the duvet slowly being pulled off of me in the night. It happened so often I thought I was going mad, but I pinched myself one night and rested my hand sideways with the top of a duvet cover on my chest, and I felt it being pulled, and knowing then it was not my imagination. We had no pets. It wasn't my sister messing around. She just wasn't that type. The TV would also turn on and off randomly, despite me not touching the remote. My desk lid was one of those you had to pull down, would fall down for no reason, despite being held in place as if it was stiff to move. A lot more happened than this too. Things got weird one night during a storm. I was in my teens, so this would have been the mid-1990s. It was about 1 a.m. when I was awoken by a massive bang, like books falling off of a bookshelf. It woke my parents, who thought the noise was from my sister's room, so they checked. Nothing. They went back to bed. Then the loft hatch flew open. It was one you had to push up with a stick to open and release the hatch. Again, my parents were up. They checked the house and nothing. It was a stormy night, so they put it down to that. But the third thing that happened, by this time I am awake and freaked out, was the smoke alarm downstairs randomly started going off. No smoke, no fire, just strange. The next day we found out my great-nan had died. I wonder if this was her way of saying goodbye. Although I will say there could have been nicer ways. I moved away to university at 18. My parents went through to stage of sleeping in separate rooms, so Mum slept in my room. For years I'd been told it was all my imagination, besides the storm night. But years later she told me she had an uneasy feeling in my bedroom and didn't like to sleep with the bedroom door shut just like me. She said it creeped her out. There's a lot I've missed out, but that's it in a nutshell. In the mid-2000s, my parents sold the house. The day before they moved out, Mum was tidying the front garden when an old lady walked past, and she stopped and spoke to my mum. She told her in the 1920s the area behind the house had been fields, and she had a friend who lived in our house, presumably one of the first occupants. They were small children, and her friend picked up some berries in a field behind the house. She ate the berries and went home to play in her bedroom, the small room at the back of the house. The girl died in her sleep, as the berries were poisonous. She lost her best friend. Mum was speechless. She now believed everything I told her for all of those years. I wasn't told this until a couple of years later. I still drive past the house from time to time. I have a weird connection with it. I will never forget the events that took place there, and I'm convinced that little girl was haunting me and that the house was haunted. Thank you for reading my story. A ghost saved my life. Figured I'd give you guys a more wholesome, weird experience that I have had. It was me, my little brother, and my older sister. We were playing in a makeshift tree house that we had built. For good visual, it was only the floor of the tree house, so it was just a flat deck basically in a tall tree. We decided to attach an old slide to it for more fun. All three of us decided we were going to go down the slide together. I was on back, my sister was in the middle, and my little brother was up front. We kept scooting back further and further so we could actually fit on the slide. I sat on a loose board and I went through the floor. I was falling headfirst towards the ground when I felt a cold hand grab my ankle and yank me towards the tree. I abruptly stopped with both my feet caught on a branch. My head stopped about 8 inches from the ground. I looked, and there was a red hand mark on my ankle where I had felt someone grab me. To this day, I have no idea why the ghost saved me, but I am forever grateful for it. Something is imitating my family. It started with a knock. One night, my boyfriend's daughter, Cole, was alone in her bedroom upstairs with the door closed. From inside the room, she saw a shadow pass under the door, and then came a knock. Not just any knock, mind you, my boyfriend's knock, the one he always uses. The familiar rhythm that instantly tells you it's him. Only, he wasn't upstairs. He and I were both sitting in the living room at the time. We brushed it off at first, but then came a second incident. Again, the two of us were downstairs in the living room, and Cole was in her room upstairs. My boyfriend caught a glimpse of someone, a shadowy figure the size and shape of his daughter, turning the corner and heading down into the basement. Thinking it was her, he called out her name. No response. Assuming she was just being playful or moody, he followed her down the basement stairs, still calling to her, asking her why she was ignoring him. He walked the whole basement, lights on, entire room was checked. She wasn't there. As he climbed back up, very confused, Cole came walking down from upstairs where she'd been the whole time. And just a few nights ago, it happened again. It was late. I was in bed with our 16-month-old daughter asleep beside me. My boyfriend was just coming back into the room when he suddenly saw what he thought was our daughter run across the floor and hide behind the chest of drawers. He stood there in shock, as she was still in bed, still sound asleep. I haven't had any first-hand experiences myself, and there have been other small incidents involving my boyfriend and his daughter that I can't fully recall at this moment. We do keep a Bible open to the Lord's Prayer in all 3 bedrooms of the house. Alright, on to the next story. For those of you that are still here listening, I'm glad you're here. Since my baby arrived. Okay, so I'm generally quite cynical and an atheist. But I won't deny that these things have happened since my daughter was born 11 months ago. I'll try to simply relay them exactly to you as they happened. 1. While I was walking her around the house to try to get her to sleep at approximately 3 a.m., one of the toys in her toy chest started playing the go-to-sleep lullaby. Must have been at least 7 hours since that toy chest had been touched. 2. She woke up in the night. I was getting her back off to sleep, but tried to lay her down in her cot, and as I did so, she started to suddenly cry loudly. Nothing too unusual about that, I know. I must have woken her up as I put her down. However, completely simultaneously with her sudden cries, there was a bright white flickering light in the hallway next to the room we were in. I worked it out to be the bathroom cabinet, which had a touchscreen button to turn on a bright makeup light. The intensity of the flickering was so fast, I was almost panicked, like it matched the shock of the baby suddenly crying. It has never done this before or since. 3. My wife was walking round in the pitch black. We put a blackout blind in our daughter's room, holding our daughter. She said she was struggling to find the door as it was closed, and so not letting any light in the room. The door opens inwards to the room she was in. She was feeling along the wall to find the door with one hand, when the door opened and suddenly hit her in her hand. 4. I was laying awake in the night, when my daughter woke up stirring slightly. She sleeps in a room connected to ours with a door frame but no door. I heard my wife soothe her by gently shushing her, so I didn't get up. I hadn't heard my wife get up, but assumed she was already up when I woke up. However, just because I wasn't 100% sure, I reached over to her side of the bed. I was facing away from her, and felt her still lying next to me, so the shushing in the other room wasn't even her. I inadvertently woke my wife by doing this, so she got up to soothe our baby, who hadn't quite settled. The day we pissed off something in the basement. My little brother and I enjoyed getting into mischief growing up, especially when it involved investigating our haunted house. We noticed no matter how many people are in the basement, no one ever wants to stay for very long. It always felt like multiple sets of eyes were watching you, waiting. Around that time, our church gave us small Bibles. We were reading them because we heard that can deter ghosts. We figured the most haunted place in our house was the basement, so we went to the basement to read the Bible out loud. We should have known something was up when we went to the basement door, and it wouldn't even budge open. It took both of us to force the door open. We got to the basement, and I started reading. I didn't get more than 2 pages in when we started hearing very heavy footsteps and whispers. We just thought it was one of our older siblings messing around with us. We looked where the footsteps were coming from. There was nothing there. But the moment we looked away, my little brother slammed to the ground. He screamed in agony, begging for help. I immediately stopped reading and ran to his side. I honestly thought he tripped. That was until I saw the scratch marks all the way down his back. There were 3 distinct marks, and they looked like a velociraptor or something had scratched him, and hard. I immediately yelled in all general directions to leave us alone. That was a freaking mistake. We heard a blood-curdling scream, and we took off running up the stairs. The moment we made it upstairs, the door slammed shut so hard it cracked the hinges. We learned that day to never read your Bible in the basement. Whatever is down there really doesn't like it. To this day, you can't stay down in that basement for too long. I am 25 years old now, and I will not stay down there longer than I ever have to. I have a lot of stories I could tell. I just start off by saying I grew up in a graveyard. Wow, that's crazy. I've been pronounced dead twice. That also is crazy. And creepy shit happens to me all the time. I think things just sort of seek me out. But here we go. I'll start off with one of the easiest stories to tell. I was 12 and my little brother was 10. We shared a bedroom just off the living room. It was a peaceful night when we were abruptly woken up at the same time. Confused, we just sort of sat and listened, thinking that maybe there was a car accident or something, because it happened a lot in front of our house. People would have not been in a ditch, and a lot of them, I'm not sure I understand the grammar there, people would have not been the ditch, and people would have not been the ditch, and a lot of them wouldn't make it. I assume they're saying people would go in the ditch and pass away. Anyways, we sat to listen, and within a couple of minutes, we heard very light tapping. All right, let's move on to our next story. Just a disclaimer here, if you hear any squawking/screaming in the background, that is my core Crowley. So if you hear that, that's what it is. Today, I'm going to share the true experience of a friend of mine who has absolutely no psychic sensitivity from when he was hospitalized with a leg injury. So this is a hospital ghost story. I love these ones. According to him, it happened around 1983, back when Michael Jackson's Thriller was all the rage. The hospital he was admitted to was quite large, and he was placed on the 3rd floor. Each floor of the hospital had its own smoking lounge. Wow, can you imagine a hospital having a smoking lounge today? But at night, during late hours, patients were only allowed to use one located next to the lobby on the 1st floor. Nowadays, it would be unthinkable, but back then, it wasn't unusual for hospitals to still have smoking areas in the building. Yeah, I also read recently that back in the day, apparently, you used to be able to smoke on aeroplanes. I thought that was really interesting. One night, he got the urge to have a smoke. He slipped a cigarette into his pocket, and since he was also thirsty, decided to grab an orange juice as well. He tucked a $1 bill into his pocket, stepped out of his room, and walked down the hall to the elevator lobby. Looking at the floor indicator, one elevator was sitting on the 1st floor, while the other was on the 6th. When he pressed a button, the one on the 6th floor descended, and he got in it to ride down to the 1st floor. As expected, the lobby was completely silent, with only the hum of vending machines filling the stillness. On his way to the smoking lounge, he brought a 60-cent orange juice from the vending machine, pocketed the change, and lit up. After finishing his smoke, he headed back towards the elevator lobby. One elevator sat on the 1st floor, while the other up again on the 6th. So late at night, and yet one's up there, he thought to himself. Strange. He pressed the button. Instead of one waiting on the 1st floor, the elevator from the 6th floor began to descend. What? That doesn't make sense. There's one right here on the 1st floor. Is it out of order? Still, it was only up to the 3rd floor, and since the other elevator was already on its way, he didn't give it too much thought. Before long, the elevator from the 6th floor arrived, and the door slid open, and he stepped inside. He pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator began to ascend. 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. But it didn't stop at the floor he had chosen. 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor. Ding! The chime echoed through the otherwise silent elevator. The door slid open on the 6th floor. There, beyond the doors, stretched a long, dark hallway. This is creepy, he thought to himself. He quickly pressed close, the close button, then pressed free, waiting for it to move. But no matter how long he waited, the doors refused to close. He pressed the button again. The doors didn't budge. What's going on here? What the hell is this? And in that instant, a laughter echoed. Panicked, he started jabbing the close button repeatedly, but the laughter kept on, over and over. Sensing something, he turned towards the hallway. From the far end of that long darkness, a small boy An apparition came sprinting towards him, laughing. Overcome with absolute terror, he kept hammering the close button, but the doors wouldn't shut. All the while, the boy was getting closer, laughing as he ran. Still, the doors refused to close. The ghost drew nearer, and he pressed the button harder. The boy ran on, again and again, until finally, just as the boy reached the doorway, the doors began to close. Relieved, he thought, finally. But the boy's ghost slipped inside at the last moment, and the child grabbed his waist. "Got you!" He blacked out, and when he came to, he was lying in his hospital bed. So maybe it had just been a dream. Relieved, he looked out the window. The sky was still grey, with a lingering feel of night, and his body was drenched in sweat. Having a nightmare like that in hospitals is the worst. But then, from deep inside his head, he thought he heard it again, the laughing of that child. That's disgusting. He shuddered, and the coins jingled in his pocket. He reached inside, a quarter, a dime, a nickel, 3 coins. He had already brought that orange juice. I definitely went down to the first floor, but I don't remember coming back up. And still, from the back of his mind, the laughter wouldn't stop of the child. Terrified, he looked around, but of course, no one was there. And then, on a hunch, he pulled back the blanket, and there was the child ghost laughing at him. The boy was under the covers, staring right at him with a large grin. He blacked out again, and shortly afterward he was transferred to another hospital, hopefully. Since then, he hasn't seen anything like it ever again. Even those who believe they have no sensitivity to the supernatural should be careful, especially during a hospital stay, and especially late at night. Well, it was a good story, but I'm not sure if that to me seems like a very fictional ghost story, and we do tend to have an emphasis on this channel of reading, like more realistic paranormal encounters, so I apologize for that one. I'm pretty sure that was a fake one. Anyway, on to the next. This is another sort of hospital story. This is a retirement center nursing story, so hopefully this one's a little better. I just recently got a job doing night shift at a retirement center close to my house. One of the first things someone told me was that the new hall was haunted. For clarification, about 2 years ago there was this guy living at the nursing home that liked to help around the place a lot. And one day he asked a worker if he could borrow the water hose. The day that there was... Oh, you know what? This story has been read in a previous podcast. I apologize. Hopefully this one is better. This one's also about a hospital. This one's about a mental hospital. I'm a retired psychiatrist. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I worked at a particular mental hospital, before it was closed due to the psychiatric reform. Most of the time I don't think about what I saw there at all, but last night I had a nightmare about the fire. My granddaughter asked me about it, and when I told her a few carefully selected stories, she suggested with me that I share my story online with all of you. Anyways, I think the first one I remember was being in a meeting room with a new patient. We can call him Eric. He was sitting opposite of me, slouched on the chair and sullen, with intense eyes and his hands cuffed to the table. I remember from reading the old notes about him that he had been deemed incapable of standing trial after he murdered his sister's father-in-law, but strangely any notes about his diagnosis seemed to not have made it into his paperwork. He was lean, on the verge of being gaunt, you might say, and even without knowing why he was at the hospital, I could feel the danger rolling off of him. Mind, he wasn't the first killer that I've worked with, so while it was a bit unnerving, I knew how to handle him. When asking him about his family, he kept to short answers. Though I got the impression that the only one he'd been really close to was his sister, with his father as an abusive drunk. She was a couple of years older than him, and married off to their well-off neighbour's son. He also kept rather quiet as to why he had killed his father-in-law, staring at me with a gaze that held a flickering flame as he asked why it even mattered. During the meeting, I started feeling really warm, like the ventilation system wasn't working, and I smelled something sort of acidic. Acrid, A-C-R-I-D, never heard that word before, like smoke. At first it was faint, and I dismissed it entirely, and then I started asking Eric about his childhood in more detail. For these questions, I told Eric, trying to keep an even and calm tone, I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just here to listen and help you, not to judge. He snorted and rolled his eyes, not at me personally it seemed, thankfully, so I pushed on. When you were younger, did you set any fires? Did you hurt anyone or anything, such as animals or younger children? He glared at me, heat flaring up, with him almost looking outlined in a strange orange-red glow. You think I hurt younger ones? Never. He tugged on the cuffs that kept him bound to the table, and on his skin a sheen of sweat and the scent became more powerful. All I did, everything I've done, was to protect. His words faded into a crackling of fire as smoke billowed around the table, and coughing, I looked away. When I looked back, I was in my office, and in front of me lay a folder from the archives, slightly smoke-damaged, with a bit of charring at the edge. As I gingerly opened it, a sepia photo of Eric met my eyes. The fire I mentioned, it took place in the 40s. No one figured out how it started, but several patients died, and it led to the authorities investigating how the hospital was ran. He had died there, buried on the mainland, and still, it seemed, like so many others, he had never left the hospital. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Take care and have a good night.